The cabin went silent the moment the pilot's voice cracked over the intercom. Not the kind of silence that comes from peace, but the heavy, suffocating kind that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. Ladies and gentlemen, the pause was long, too long. This is your captain speaking. People looked up from their phones. A child stopped kicking the seat. A woman halfway through a sip of water froze with the cup still in her hand. Everyone felt it. Something was wrong. We are experiencing a critical mechanical failure. The pilot continued, his voice strained, carefully controlled, but trembling just enough to betray the truth. For your safety, please listen very carefully. A flight attendant near the aisle instinctively grabbed the back of a seat to steady herself. Ladies and gentlemen, the pilot said again, quieter now, we need to prepare for a crash landing. For a split second, no one reacted. Then the meaning hit, passengers froze as if time itself had stopped, eyes widened, mouths fell open. A man in a business suit whispered, no, 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 no. A woman 2 rows ahead began sobbing uncontrollably, her hands shaking as she tried to fasten her seatbelt again, even though it was already locked. Someone screamed. Another person began praying out loud, their voice breaking with every word. Across the aisle, an elderly man closed his eyes and pressed his forehead against the seat in front of him, whispering a name over and over, maybe a wife, maybe a child. The plane shuddered violently, snapping everyone back into reality. The aircraft dropped suddenly, not enough to throw people from their seats, but enough to make stomachs lurch and hearts race. Oxygen masks trembled in their compartments above, threatening to fall. The pilot's voice returned, more urgent now. We have lost one engine completely, he said. The second engine is unstable. We are losing altitude faster than expected. Outside the windows, the sky no longer looked peaceful. Dark clouds swallowed the horizon, thick and heavy, like a wall closing in. Lightning flickered somewhere in the distance, brief flashes illuminating terrified faces reflected in the glass. Turbulence rocked the aircraft again, harder this time. The plane groaned, metal creaking like it was under unbearable strain. Luggage shifted in overhead bins. A suitcase burst open somewhere behind, spilling clothes onto the aisle. Flight attendants moved quickly, though their smiles were gone now. Their voices were firm but edged with fear. Seatbelts tight. One of them said, her hands trembling as she checked rows, please remain seated, brace position when instructed. A young couple clutched each other, foreheads pressed together, whispering promises they should have made years ago. A teenager frantically typed a message on his phone, tears dripping onto the screen. An older woman pulled a photograph from her purse and kissed it again and again. Fear was everywhere, not loud, not dramatic, but thick, like smoke filling the cabin, impossible to escape. Another violent jolt slammed the plane downward. Several passengers screamed as the aircraft dropped hundreds of feet in seconds. The engines sounded wrong now, uneven, strained, like a wounded animal fighting to stay alive. The captain came back on the intercom, his voice barely holding together. We are attempting an emergency descent, he said. Please follow all crew instructions. Mayday has been declared. That word Mayday landed like a final verdict. People understood what it meant. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't turbulence. This wasn't just a delay. This was real. A flight attendant wiped tears from her face, then squared her shoulders and demonstrated the brace position with mechanical precision. Her hands shook, but she didn't stop. Outside, the ground seemed closer now, patches of land visible through breaks in the clouds. Fields, roads, too close, far too close. Another announcement crackled through the speakers. If you are traveling with a child, the pilot said, secure your own mask before assisting them. A woman let out a broken laugh that turned into sobbing. There won't be time, she whispered, and then, through all the noise, the crying, the shaking of the aircraft, something unexpected happened. A voice rose, not loud, not panicked, calm. Captain, the voice said. People turned their heads. The sound hadn't come from the intercom. It had come from the cabin, from seat 14C. A man stood slowly, gripping the top of the seat in front of him for balance as the plane shook again. He was in his late 50s, maybe early 60s, sun, weathered face, calloused hands. He wore worn boots, faded jeans, and a jacket that smelled faintly of soil and diesel. He didn't look like a hero. He looked like someone who had worked his entire life. "Captain," he said again, louder this time, his voice steady despite the chaos. I think I can help." A few passengers stared at him in disbelief. Someone scoffed. Another person laughed hysterically. "Sit down," a man shouted from across the aisle. "This isn't the time." But the man in 14C didn't react. He kept his eyes fixed forward, toward the cockpit door, as if he could see through it. A flight attendant hurried over. "Sir, you need to be seated immediately." "I know," the man said gently, "but please, tell the captain I need to speak to him." The attendant hesitated. "Sir, unless you're a trained pilot, I'm not," the man replied honestly. That only made the laughter louder. Desperate, broken laughter. "Then what are you doing?" Someone cried. The plane lurched again, harder than before. Overhead, oxygen masks finally dropped, swinging wildly. The cabin filled with the sharp hiss of released air. The man in 14C grabbed a mask, placed it over his face, then spoke again, his voice muffled but still calm. "I've spent 40 years operating heavy machinery," he said, "in storms, in emergencies, when things go wrong fast." He looked around the cabin, not at the frightened passengers, but at the flight attendant standing in front of him. "When something's falling apart," he continued, "panic makes it worse. Someone has to keep their hands steady." For a moment no one spoke. Another jolt. The flight attendant swallowed hard. She pressed the button on the intercom that connected directly to the cockpit. "Captain," she said quietly, "there's a passenger requesting to speak with you." There was a pause. Then the captain's voice, strained and exhausted, came back. "Is he a pilot?" "No, sir," she answered. Another pause, longer this time. The plane dropped again. Finally, the captain said the words no one expected to hear. "Send him in." And as the cockpit door unlocked, the passengers of that plane watched a farmer from seat 14C walk toward the front, while the rest of them held their breath, wondering if hope had just stood up. If this was the moment everything truly fell apart. People laughed not because anything was funny, but because fear had nowhere else to go. It was nervous laughter, sharp and broken, the kind that escapes when the mind refuses to accept reality. A man near the aisle shook his head repeatedly, whispering, "This can't be real." A woman pressed her palm to her mouth, laughing and crying at the same time, tears streaming down her face. Then the man in worn boots stood up. He moved slowly, carefully, timing his steps between the violent shudders of the aircraft. The cabin lights flickered as he rose to his full height. He wasn't tall, but there was something solid about him, like a tree that had survived too many storms to bother swaying anymore. People stared. His boots were scuffed and dusty, the kind that had seen mud, oil, and long days under open skies. His jacket was faded at the elbows, stretched thin by years of use. His hands, large, rough, deeply lined, gripped the seat in front of him for balance. He didn't look like someone who belonged on a plane. He looked like someone who belonged on land. "I'm a farmer," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. It cut through the laughter, through the crying, through the hum of failing engines. It wasn't confident, it wasn't dramatic, it was simply steady. More laughter followed, harsher this time. "A farmer," someone scoffed from the back. "This isn't a movie." Another voice shouted, "Sit down." Someone else yelled, "You're going to get us killed." The farmer didn't react, he didn't argue, he didn't defend himself. He didn't raise his voice, he just stood there, breathing slowly through the oxygen mask, eyes fixed forward toward the cockpit door. Inside the cockpit, alarms screamed. The pilot's hands trembled as he fought the controls. Warning lights flashed red and amber across the panel. One engine was gone completely, the other surged unpredictably, refusing to stabilize, altitude dropping. The co-pilot said, his voice cracking. "I know," the captain replied, forcing calm into his tone. I know. Then a voice came through the cabin intercom, different from the flight attendants, different from the panic. "Captain," the man said again, "please." There was a pause. The captain leaned back in his seat, sweat running down his temples. He had thousands of flight hours, years of training, simulators, emergency drills, and yet nothing in his training had prepared him for this exact moment. He pressed the intercom button. "Who is this?" the captain asked sharply. "My name's not important," the man replied. "What's important is that I've spent 40 years keeping machines under control when they wanted to tear themselves apart." The co-pilot shot the captain a look. "Sir, unless he's certified, I know he's not," the captain said, cutting him off. He spoke back into the mic. "Sir, do you know how to fly a plane?" In the cabin, the farmer shook his head. "No," he said plainly. No hesitation, no pride. A ripple of disbelief moved through the passengers. "Then what are you doing?" someone screamed. "This is insane, security." The farmer closed his eyes for a brief moment as if grounding himself. When he opened them again, they were clear. "No," he repeated, speaking into the intercom. "I don't know how to fly a plane." The captain exhaled sharply, anger and exhaustion colliding. "Then sit down and let us do our jobs." The farmer didn't move, but he continued, his voice calm as still water, "I've been driving heavy machinery since before some of you were born." He shifted his weight as the plane jolted again, then continued. "Tractors with failing hydraulics, harvesters with seized gears, equipment that weighs more than this aircraft and doesn't forgive mistakes." Another violent shudder rocked the cabin. A scream tore through the rows, "And right now," the farmer said quietly, "this plane feels familiar." Silence fell. Not the panicked silence from before, but something different, attention. The captain closed his eyes for half a second. His mind raced. Every protocol said no. Every rule said no. Every rational part of him knew this was madness. But reality didn't care about rules. They were running out of altitude, running out of options, running out of time. The co-pilot whispered, "Captain, we're not going to hold it much longer." The captain looked at the instrument panel again. Then at the windshield ground creeping closer, details becoming sharper by the second. He pressed the intercom again. "Why should I trust you?" he asked. The farmer's answer came without delay. "Because I don't panic when machines start screaming," he said. "And because I know when to listen instead of fight." The captain swallowed. Another alarm blared. He made a decision he would either be praised for or remembered for forever. "With nothing left to lose," he said quietly, "I'm unlocking the cockpit." The sound echoed through the cabin, a sharp click as the reinforced door disengaged. Gasps filled the plane. "No way." Someone whispered, "He's letting him in. This can't be happening." A flight attendant stepped aside as the door opened. The farmer walked forward, each step steady despite the chaos around him. Passengers watched him pass, some with disbelief, some with anger, some with desperate hope in their eyes. As he reached the cockpit entrance, he paused. He turned back toward the cabin for just a moment. "Brace yourselves," he said softly, "and trust me." Then he stepped inside. The cockpit door closed behind him. And for the first time since the announcement, the plane didn't feel completely doomed. It felt uncertain, but uncertainty for the people on that aircraft suddenly felt like hope. The farmer lowered himself into the co-pilot's seat as if he had done it 1,000 times before. Not because it was familiar, but because panic had never helped him learn a machine. The cockpit smelled of hot metal and electrical burn. Warning lights pulsed across the panel like open wounds. Alarms shrieked in overlapping tones, each demanding attention, each insisting it was the most important. The pilot glanced at the man beside him, sweat running down his temple and into the collar of his uniform. "You touch nothing," the captain said quickly. "Not until I tell you." The farmer nodded, no offense taken. No ego bruised, understood. He rested his hands lightly on his thighs, palms open, fingers relaxed. He didn't reach for the controls. He didn't lean forward. He simply watched, listened. The aircraft shuddered again, dropping several feet in a single sickening lurch. The altimeter needle slid downward like it had lost all respect for gravity. Altitude still bleeding, the co-pilot muttered. "I know," the captain said. His knuckles were white on the yoke. "I know." The farmer leaned slightly forward, eyes moving, not randomly but methodically. He didn't read the labels, he read the behavior, the vibrations, the uneven pull, the way the aircraft resisted some inputs and exaggerated others. It reminded him of a combine with a failing transmission, how it fought back when you forced it, how it steadied when you worked with it. "What do you feel?" the captain asked, almost without realizing he had asked. The farmer answered slowly. "She's overcorrecting." He said, "You're fighting her." The co-pilot turned sharply. "Sir, with respect, let him finish." The captain snapped. The farmer pointed, not touching, just indicating. "When a machine starts shaking like this," he continued, "it's telling you it doesn't like what you're asking. Ease it, don't fight it." The captain hesitated. Every instinct screamed against it. Training demanded control, precision, authority. But desperation bends rules. "Okay," the captain said finally, "show me." The farmer placed his hands on the yoke. They were steady, not stiff, not trembling, just steady, easy. The farmer murmured almost to himself. "Easy now." He adjusted pressure, not pushing, not pulling, allowing. The plane responded, not dramatically, not instantly, but enough. The nose stopped pitching so violently. The sudden drops softened into longer, slower descents. The altimeter needle still moved, but no longer in free fall. The co-pilot stared at the instruments. Rate of descent, it's slowing. In the cabin, passengers felt it before they understood it. The screaming softened. The frantic gasps became cautious breaths. A woman looked up from her prayer and frowned. "Did we just level out?" Someone whispered. Hope, fragile, dangerous, undeniable, slipped into the cabin like light through cracked clouds. Sweat poured down the pilot's face now, soaking the collar of his uniform. He wiped it away with the back of his hand, eyes never leaving the farmer's movements. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Same thing I do when a tractor's about to flip." The farmer replied. "I stop arguing with it." Another alarm sounded. The co-pilot cursed under his breath. "We're still losing power on engine 2. The farmer nodded. "I know. You're trying to make her fly like she's healthy." He glanced out the windshield. Through the thinning clouds, land emerged, patches of green and brown, stitched together by narrow roads. A rural town sat ahead, small and quiet, unaware of the battle happening above it. Fields open, flat. The farmer's eyes narrowed. "Captain," he said gently, "you see that land?" The pilot followed his gaze. "Yes, we can't make an airport," the farmer continued, "but we don't need one." The co-pilot's heart sank. "You're talking about landing out there. I'm talking about surviving," the farmer said. The plane shuddered again, but less violently this time. Passengers gripped armrests as the aircraft dipped, then steadied. A child stopped crying. The pilot stared ahead, jaw clenched. "If we miss, we tear apart." The farmer nodded once. "Same with a harvester and a ditch," he said. "But if you line it up right, sometimes you walk away." The captain took a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "All right," he said quietly. "I'll talk you through it." The farmer listened. Every instruction was absorbed, not memorized but understood. "Flaps," the pilot said. The farmer waited. "Now," the pilot said. The farmer moved, smooth, controlled, patient. The aircraft responded again, settling just a little more into the air. The co-pilot's voice shook. "Captain, we're stabilizing." In the cabin, flight attendants exchanged looks, confused, hopeful, terrified. One of them pressed the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said carefully, "please remain in brace position." Her voice cracked, but not with panic. With possibility. Sweat dripped from the pilot's brow onto the instrument panel. He didn't wipe it away this time. "You're doing good," he said to the farmer, surprising himself. The farmer didn't smile. "I'm just listening," he replied. The open field grew larger in the windshield now. Fence lines, a dirt road, a farmhouse in the distance. Close, very close. The pilot's hands hovered near the controls, ready to take over at any second. but for now he let the farmer guide them in. And for the first time since the engines failed, the plane was no longer falling out of the sky. It was being guided toward the only chance they had left. The landing was rough, there was no grace to it, no smooth descent, no gentle kiss of wheels on a runway. It was survival. The wheels struck the earth harder than anyone was ready for. Metal screamed as the landing gear slammed into uneven ground. The plane bounced once violently, throwing passengers forward against their restraints. A second impact followed, sharper, louder, ripping a cry from every throat inside the cabin. Sparks exploded beneath the wings. A shower of fire traced the aircraft's path as steel scraped against dirt and stone. The plane skidded sideways, tearing through dry grass, the sound deafening. Metal grinding, glass rattling, something snapping somewhere deep inside the fuselage. People screamed, not words, not prayers, pure instinct. The farmer tightened his grip, jaw locked, eyes fixed forward. "Hold her," he muttered. "Just hold." The pilot braced himself, heart hammering so hard it felt like it might break through his ribs. His hands hovered over the controls, ready to take over. But he didn't. He trusted the man beside him. The aircraft bounced again, lighter this time, then slammed down one final time. The nose dipped, the wings groaned. For a terrifying second, it felt like the plane might roll. Then it didn't. The skidding slowed. The screaming metal softened into a long, grinding drag. Dust and smoke filled the air outside the windshield, turning the world brown and gray. And then the plane stopped. No explosion, no fireball, just stillness, silence, not a sound inside the cabin, not a breath, not a cry. Passengers sat frozen, eyes wide, waiting for something, anything, to happen next. Seconds passed, then one person began to laugh. A short, broken sound, half hysteria, half disbelief. Another sobbed loudly. Someone else shouted, "We're alive," like they needed to hear the words out loud for them to be real. Then the cabin erupted. Screams not of terror this time, but of relief. People cried openly, strangers hugged. A man collapsed into the aisle, shaking uncontrollably. A woman kissed the floor. A child laughed through tears, asking if it was over. Everyone was alive. In the cockpit, the pilot finally let go of the controls. His hands were shaking now. He didn't try to stop them. He leaned back in his seat, head falling against the headrest, and let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in his chest for hours. The farmer sat quietly. He didn't cheer, didn't raise his hands, didn't say a word. He just closed his eyes for a moment. Emergency sirens grew louder in the distance. Red and blue lights flickered through the smoke as fire trucks, ambulances, and police vehicles raced across the fields toward the aircraft. The pilot turned to the man beside him. "You saved them," he said, voice breaking. "You saved all of them." The farmer shook his head slowly. "No," he replied, "we did. Firefighters reached the plane first, spraying foam along the wings, checking for flames." The cabin doors opened, and fresh air rushed in, carrying the smell of earth and grass. Passengers began evacuating, some limping, some crying, some laughing like they had just woken from a nightmare they couldn't quite believe was over. As people stepped down onto the field, many turned back to look at the plane, to look at the cockpit, to look at the man who shouldn't have been there. One passenger, an older woman with tear-streaked cheeks, approached the farmer as he exited last. She reached out, gripping his arm tightly. "You brought us home," she said. "I don't even know your name." He smiled gently. "You don't need to." Another man stepped forward, voice shaking. "How did you do it?" he asked. "How did you stay so calm?" The farmer looked out across the field. The same kind of field he'd worked his whole life, wind moving through grass, dark clouds breaking apart above. He thought for a moment, then he said, "When you've spent your life saving crops in bad weather, you learn not to panic." The words spread quickly. Emergency responders listened, passengers repeated it, someone recorded it, someone else cried again. The pilot watched from a distance, helmeted firefighters moving around him, medics checking him over. He had worn the uniform, he had the training, but the hero of that day hadn't been sitting in the captain's seat. Later, as buses arrived and survivors were wrapped in blankets, one final detail came to light: the farmer's boarding pass. Seat 14C, no upgrades, no special treatment, no expectation of greatness, just a man who stood up when everything was falling apart. Sometimes the hero isn't in uniform. They're sitting quietly in 14C waiting for the moment when staying calm matters more than knowing the rules. The end.